Hello, and welcome to the first Conversation About Photography, a new series of interviews with abstract photographers. My name is Paul Rowland, and I'm based in Japan, just outside of Tokyo. Today, I'm joined by Alan Constant, a photographer based in New Mexico. Hi, Alan.
Thank you, Paul.
So, to start off, before we dive into your work, could you please tell us about your background and how you got into photography in the first place?
I've been doing photography for, I think, 45 years. I started at a little night school class in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I just really took to it. I just loved it. Since I was in the Bay Area, I decided to go to San Francisco State University to study it more. At that point in the early 70s, it was kind of a important photography center in the country. I took some classes there. And when I first started photography, I was really drawn to West Coast photography. A lot of it was like landscape photography, sharp and focus type of stuff. And I really did that for quite a bit. In fact, I did black and white for about 3 or 4 years before I even tried color. But once I tried color, I was hooked. I mean, I just really loved it. And so um, I graduated from San Francisco State in 1972. I actually graduated with a BA in art history. And I kept doing photography, but I didn't really do it as a occupation. I just did it more as a avocation. Um, and over the years, I kept developing my work. And as I shot color photography, there were certain points where I would try shooting something a little bit abstract. They were kind of fun to try, but I wasn't really drawn to it. And then in 2003, I was in Mexico, and there's one image in particular which we will take a look at when we look at my images. It was of this wall I saw in Mexico, and it was a two-toned wall, orange on the bottom and white on the top. To be perfectly honest, I had Mark Rothko in mind. I love Mark Rothko, and dividing the image into two planes. And so I shot the picture. And then when I came back home uh, and was taking a look at it on my computer, it didn't really seem like much. There wasn't much to it. But for some reason, I decided, yeah, I'll just pull it into Photoshop and see what happens to it. And when I did that and started pulling things out of it, all of a sudden it became a whole new image. And it showed me what abstract photography can be, and it showed me how I could use Photoshop to enhance that. And so I started shooting more abstract photography. I actually started on Instagram about, I think, 4.5 or 5 years ago. And I really had this idea that I was unique in that I was shooting abstract photography. And then after the first year, after I counted about 120 different abstract photographers, I realized that what I was doing wasn't necessarily so special. And then a couple of years ago, I started playing around more with composite photography. And I've seen other artists take photographs and put it into the work and create mixed media type stuff. And I was trying to go for that kind of feeling. And I I went through all my old, more traditional photography, found images I really liked, and then I started combining them with abstract photography. And I really liked the result. And so since then, I've been doing uh, primarily composite photography. Sometimes I combine two abstract photographs to make a totally abstract image, but more often than not, I find a more traditional photograph to go with my abstract photography. So that, in a nutshell, is what has brought me to this point.
Thank you very much. It's always interesting to hear people's stories, and I'm interested to see how all of this is shown in your work. So, without further ado, let's take a look. Okay, what does that look like?
So this is the image I was referring to, the one I shot in Mexico in 2003. As I said, when I first looked at it on my computer, I didn't see a whole lot going on in there. But once I applied some Photoshop controls to increase the contrast and bring out certain details, I really started to see a lot more going on. I've always loved Mark Rothko, and this obviously is not Mark Rothko, but you can certainly see his influence in this image. There's that little spiral line in the middle that to me always reminds me of barbed wire. It's almost like this prison I'd been in, but I can finally figure out how to get over that barbed wire into a whole new field of abstract photography.
It's amazing how so much meaning can come out of such a relatively simple image. Is there anything else you see in this? What about this white cloud down the bottom?
You have a cloud that doesn't have a lot of substance sitting on a wall that is nothing but substance. And there's something about that. I've really started to understand lately that I'm way more of an intuitive photographer than I am thought out photographer where I plan my images. And I like finding happy accidents or maybe I could say accidental meanings in the work I do. So, and I don't always know what the symbology means to me, but I know it kind of means something, you know. So there's that cloud, which is, you could almost say is a cloud of freedom, you know, resting on the wall with the barbed wire and me finding some kind of way to kind of work through that, you know, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I understand your difficulty in putting this into language, but what you say makes a lot of sense to me. And I'm also looking at the left middle of the image at that red line that seems to taper off towards the middle. But I'm also seeing that maybe as the beginning of a sunrise, the beginning of the second part of your life or something like that. So there's so much meaning in this image, I think.
That actually is an artifact of Photoshop. And I was just starting in Photoshop right around the time I was working on this image. So that came about because I selected the lower part of the wall to increase the contrast on its own, but I overshot it. So it created this red space. But I love it. It helped me to understand that mistakes in Photoshop can really lead to some wonderful imagery. But I appreciate hearing your, your impression of it and what it reminded you of.
Mm. No, it's a really potent image. Okay, let's take a look at the next one you've got. Okay, so this is called Triad, and I can see three objects there. First of all, what was the idea behind the title? The first one was simply called White Over Orange. What were you thinking here?
Triad is a very simple title for, on one level, a simple image. This image is a result of my working with Photoshop. And part of working with Photoshop is when I'm out looking for images, looking at certain subjects and understanding that I can create a certain effect, even though it doesn't look like much. So this image is actually of a bus stop. Um, those three squares are actually three pieces of masking tape. left over from some kind of poster or something that somebody took down. But I've learned some techniques in Photoshop, and one technique I use once in a while, I don't use it too much. The technique is where you invert the colors in the image. So this is actually a negative of what I saw. And that's why those little pieces of tape came out dark rather than light like masking tape. But again, this is a result of just my playing around in Photoshop. And I think if I was to describe the way I use Photoshop, I think playing is probably the best word. Because a lot of times I'll play, I'll try different things. Sometimes I'm pleasantly surprised, and sometimes it's like, that didn't really do anything. Uh, but this one in particular, I've always really liked this image. And again, there's not a rational explanation. It's more of something intuitive going on with the image, that speaks to me.
It's very evocative. I feel like I can see things through the mist, through some sort of fog or maybe smog at the bottom. And I'm just intrigued about how you use Photoshop. What kinds of tools do you go to first? Maybe without giving away too many of your secrets.
I don't mind giving away secrets. One of the first things I do is to increase the levels because a lot of what I shoot is very subtle. I've learned that with Photoshop. If you shoot an image that's almost monotone, there are just colors and contrasts there that Photoshop will just bring out. And if I shoot a contrasty scene, Photoshop can't do much with it because the contrast is already there. Again, this scene was really monotone and it was very subtle. So, yeah, so the first thing I do is increase the contrast to see what happens with it. And then from there, I can go in a lot of different directions. Sometimes I'll play with the color. Sometimes I can just all invert the colors and see if that does anything. If I can mention another word when I'm using Photoshop, the word I think of most often is subtle. To me, if I do something in Photoshop and it's very obvious that I just Photoshopped that doesn't interest me. But if I can do it in a way that creates a subtlety, I also like mystery in a picture. So subtlety and mystery can sometimes go hand in hand. A few years ago, my wife and I, we did a home exchange with a couple in Portland, Maine. Halfway through the week, they contacted us, and because I had a lot of work hanging in our apartment, they said, "Hey, we have an argument. We need you to help figure out the answer to the argument." One of them said, "I think these are photographs," and the other, her partner said, "I think they're paintings," and they could not tell which was which. So I said, "Yeah, they're photographs." And actually, a lot of people over the years have confused these for paintings. And even when I tell them these aren't paintings or photographs, and then they'll say, "Okay, well, when did you do this painting?" Even after I've just told them this a photograph, they still don't quite get it. So I kind of like that, the fact that I like to kind of blur the lines between photography and painting. And as we go along, I'll talk a little bit more about my technique because I think it is related to the way painters work in a way.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love you talking about that playfulness, which is also part of how people interact and engage with them as well. They don't exactly know what they're getting, what they're looking at. Perhaps as we look at some of the other images you have here, I'd like to hear a little bit about the materials you use in terms of what you use to print on, um, but also some of the painters and artists that you're influenced by. But let's go on to the third image.
It was a few years ago in San Francisco. I found this truck, the kind that you carry furniture in. And they're just all around the truck. There's all kinds of marks and scratches and everything. And so I did a lot of shooting on this truck. And this particular image, of course, to me, it looks like some beam is crushing a heart. Not all my images, like the last one, I can see a literal image or meaning coming from it. But, and everyone's experienced disappointment and that kind of thing. So I just like the image because of what it depicts. But I also love the gestural quality of this photograph, with all the scratches and actually the frame around it is a panel in the truck. So I was just able to use that to create its own frame.
Yeah, that frame works very, very well. And I meant to ask you about the previous image, but it applies to this one. What about the square format? Presumably, this was just an accident of what you found, but how do you feel about the format and ratio of your photos?
That's a good question. To be honest, I started doing square format when I came onto Instagram because it's a lot easier just to do square than to do rectangular images. For almost all of my composite imagery, though, I've been doing a 4 by 5 format because to me that's a traditional photographic image. But I do like squares. I have a number of square images, older ones like this that I have transformed back into 4 by 5. But some of them like this, I just want to keep as a square. A square implies a perfect circle, and of course, circle can be a symbol of infinity. Like never-ending time. So there's something about this format that I just find really pleasing.
So what work did you do in Photoshop on this one? I can see so many scratches, so much texture. Did you do something to bring that out?
Yeah, to be honest, I didn't do a whole lot other than, bringing out what was already there.
Without getting too pretentious or highfalutin, the idea of drawing out what's already there in the image, kind of releasing its potential, makes me think of, Michelangelo's description of seeing the form of his sculptures inside the actual marble. So I was just intrigued to find out who are some of the artists. You mentioned Mark Rothko that you've really been influenced and inspired by. Who are some of your touchstones?
Aside from Mark Rothko, I actually did an exercise in a workshop a few years ago. We did an exercise called Your Place in Art History. We basically had to talk about our work and who influenced us and where it fit into the history of art, which was a great exercise. And in doing this, I discovered a Spanish painter. I think his name is Antonian Tapias. He was a mixed media artist. So he did a lot of work where he actually used dirt and concrete and sand in the image. And a lot of his images actually looked like this one, really kind of rough and, raw. I'd say most of the abstract expressionists I've always liked, of course, Jackson Pollock, and abstract photographer, of course, Aaron Siskine. I think it was in the 30s and 40s. He was one of the first photographers to actually consciously do abstract photographs. I wouldn't say a lot of my work looks like his necessarily, but he's definitely there in the background for me.
Absolutely, and I can see the relationship, the similarity to Antonio Tapies. Well, just thinking of that connection, he's making his images intentionally. He's creating rather than finding them, and of course, you're creating them as well through your curation and editing and use of Photoshop. But have you ever considered making some work yourself within the realm of art?
I have thought about it more lately because I know other photographers who have kind of made a transition to mixed media and that type of thing. To be honest, I don't think I have a feel for it. And actually, when I was taking art history in at San Francisco State, one of my art heroes was Paul Klee, and he still is. I love him. And there was one point during my studies there that I took one of his images. It was basically of a color grid, and I created my own color grid to see what it was like to do something like he did. And it's easy to look at something like that and say, "Oh, I could do that." But then to actually sit down and try to create it, yeah, it showed me how difficult it was, and how brilliant he was to kind of come up with a simple idea like that and to make all the colors work together. I became aware a long time ago that I need boundaries when I work. To sit in front of an open canvas and to come up with some kind of idea it's too much for me. My mind cannot handle that. So photography creates more of boundaries for me. It gives me perimeters to work within. If I just have an open space, it's kind of like being in the middle of a desert. Which way do I go? I don't know. To me, it's kind of paralyzing to kind of be stuck there. And when I talk about photography, I like to talk about exploring the inherent tension in the two-dimensional surface. And you can do that through painting. I mean, everybody does it, when they're working on a two-dimensional surface. But for me, using photography, I find images that help me to explore that, if that makes sense.
Oh, yes, it makes a lot of sense. I know exactly what you mean by needing some kind of perimeter, something to work within. But I'd love to hear about how you actually discover these images in the first place. But let's take a look at this next one, which is called Apertura.
I have a whole series of Apertura images, and Apertura, of course, in Spanish means opening. So for me, it's about exploring different levels of reality, and finding how one reality can create an opening into a different reality. And I mentioned earlier that sometimes I make mistakes when I'm in Photoshop. And this is a perfect example. This whole series started because of a mistake I made. I was trying to resize a picture and I just wanted to overlay it on top of another picture, but I made it the wrong size. So when I dropped it into the layered picture, all of a sudden it created its own frame. It took me by surprise. It just opened up this whole new vista for me and maybe what I could do in Photoshop. So this is actually just a picture of a wall I shot when I was in Rome. And once again, you look at the image, it would not really look like anything. I used the invert tool, I inverted the colors. And I think I play with the colors a bit more to kind of create this blue and green, and then that little bit of pink in there or magenta. I just love that. I mean, to me, it feels really painterly. I did maybe 7 or 8 of these that I feel were really successful, but to me, this one is my favorite one.
It really does feel like a painted surface. It's quite incredible.
When I'm out looking for images, I look for things that most people wouldn't look for. I developed a sense of looking for imagery. So mostly when I'm looking for something, I'm looking for an interesting composition. Colors. I think people appreciate the colors.
Absolutely. I can't take my eyes off that pink, that magenta streak, which maybe reminds me of a flare or something. Maybe somebody's set it off in the middle of a field at night. And that odd, almost square oblong shape at the bottom left. What is that? What do you see in this image?
That green block to me, well, it looks like a block of cement or something. But again, it's more of an intuitive feel for it. To me, it's a minimalist image. That little pink magenta streak in the center, if you put your finger over that and take it away, it's not the same picture anymore. And that fascinates me how little details like that can change the overall feeling of the image, you know. To me, I guess I feel like this is some strange object in the middle of a field at night. That's what it reminds me of.
Absolutely. I think now we're getting to one of the composite images you were talking about, and this is one of the the photos of yours that has always appealed to me greatly. Maybe it's the boat coming right out at the viewer, which reminds me of that famous early film of the train that was approaching the camera, so people thought that it was going to
Hmm.
come out of the actual cinema screen. So this one is really powerful to me. Can you talk us through this, please?
To me, this is one of the most successful ones I've done. I think one hallmark of these is that when I take the images, like this is two different images. One, of course, is the image of the boat. I took that down by Salton Sea in California. And the other image is paint peeling on an industrial container. Now, when I took each one of these, I had no idea what this whole image would become. And in fact, I had this image of the boat for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years before I really did anything with it. But when I started doing composite photography, I knew I wanted to do something with this boat. And when I pulled it into Photoshop, almost right away, I thought of this container. And I like the fact that the white paint to me looks like clouds. So it almost looks like the boat is emerging out of the clouds. And again, what does that mean? I don't know. You know, I mean, it can mean whatever you want. To me, it's a vehicle for some kind of spiritual movement. So in a lot of these composite images, I'm combining two images that I'd say 99.9% of the images are ones that I took with no idea in mind how I was going to use them. And it's like when I'm in Photoshop and I'm working with a composite image, um, I either start with an abstract image or I start with a traditional image. And then I just start thinking about all the photographs I've done and trying to think of one that goes with it. This one, this is the only combination I tried, but most of my composite images, I probably have to try at least 3 or 4 different combinations and sometimes as many as 10 or 12 before I hit on the right combination. And a lot of it's intuitive. I like to let the image tell me where it wants to go.
Mm.
And and the way it tells me, I'll try something in Photoshop. No, that didn't work. I'll try something else. Oh, that did work. So I have kind of like this tuning fork inside of me that once I hit on a combination, I could just hear that tuning fork. It's, oh, that's it. That's kind of how I work with these images.
I love the way you describe the process. And to be honest, even though I know this is a photograph or made up of photographs, and I'm literally listening to you talk about how you've manipulated it, I know exactly how other people viewing your work might confuse this with painting. And I want to talk about it. I want to think about it in that way. It's quite uncanny actually. Some of the scratches at the bottom in that wonderful dark blue teal almost color remind me of craquelure, that kind of cracking on a painting. And of course, you're often taking photos of old and cracked paint. So it's not too surprising people are a bit confused. Just before we go on to the next composite image, I just wanted to ask you, have you ever created one of these images using more than two original photos?
Yes.
So it's always, oh, so how does that process work? How do you add another one to the mix?
Well, in Photoshop, they have a pretty basic function called layers. Actually, I'll go into layering a little bit more in the next couple of images. Yeah, usually I use an abstract image in a traditional image. And sometimes if I add a third or fourth image, it's just one little section that needs a little something to create a little more interest. So this one is called Oxford. So this image of the sculpture I found in a little garden in Oxford. And actually, this is maybe 20 years ago I took this picture, and I never did anything with it. I found this because I found a door to a garden that was open, and I kind of assumed I probably wasn't supposed to go in there. But a lot of times when I'm shooting, I just let my curiosity guide me, through doors or through alleyways or whatever to see what I'm going to find. And I'm forever grateful that I followed my muse and found this guy. I can't remember if I chose him first or if I chose the background first, but this is one image that has grown on me over the last few months. I think I created it about a year and a half ago. The background of this image, the purple and the pink, I think it actually was more like a couple different shades of green, but this is where I inverted some colors. And those letters, those white letters were black letters. But I inverted the colors because I like the feeling of the colors the way they look now. And a lot of it too, when I'm inverting colors or just changing colors of one part of it, again, it's all intuitive. I'm going for a certain feeling and I know when I hit it. And believe me, there's plenty of times I don't hit it, and I have to keep trying different things. My basic method for creating these, so I'll take the abstract image, I'll create a layer, and then I'll take the middle image, the in this case the sculpture of this guy, and I'll lay it on top of the abstract image, and then I'll take another copy of the abstract image and lay it on top of that. So I create a sandwich, two identical abstract images with another traditional image in between the two. And then basically, I just start scraping away the top layer. And again, subtlety has to play a really big part in this. I don't want it to look obvious. So I'll just keep playing with it, scraping it down and revealing more of the image underneath it until I kind of get a feeling I want. And sometimes I go too far, take the bottom image and copy back on top again and start over because I don't like the direction it's going in. There's a lot of playing back and forth and trying to balance the images together until I get a combination that I like. And I like this one.
The color is extraordinary in this one. And it's interesting to hear you say that you'd inverted it because it has that kind of dreamlike feel to it. It's not quite real. And I was just trying to remember who this reminds me of. And I think it's Odilon Redon because of the fantastical use of color, but also the symbolism of this statue, a god or some sort of figure. It really reminds me of Redon there, and this really feels like a fragment from a dream. I'm responding to it not as a painting or as an artwork, but maybe as a still from a film or an illustration from a book. Do you ever feel that there are any connections with other mediums? I know you have experimented with combining images with words and poems, with other writers and artists. Do you feel that connection? Do you feel that these are purely photographs?
That's a really good question. I think when I'm working on an image, I don't consciously think about other media that I'm trying to connect with. But I hear what you're saying, and I hadn't thought of Red Dawn, but I see that in here. I actually really admire Gustav Klimt. For me, I could see a little bit of Gustav Klimt in this also, where he takes a portrait and really abstracts the background around it. But I would love to work with words more. Every time I've tried to put words in it, every time, most of the time, it feels contrived. I really admire different artists who can put words into their imagery and just make it look totally natural. I haven't quite achieved that yet, but I still work at it now and then.
Yeah, this is fabulous. Please talk us through this one.
Yeah, this is an image I shot in Florence, Italy. The background is this old tattered billboard I found in San Francisco. I just love that billboard. In fact, I've tried different images with this, and this is my favorite one. And there's something about the image, taking a very refined piece of architecture and combining it with a tattered billboard, and almost like putting them on the same level, artistically. I've never got a lot of great feedback on this image, but I still like it a lot.
This is incredible. For some reason, I don't think I've spent much time with this before. This one has just really struck me. I'm really impressed. I love what you say about putting two very different parts of the world, a faded billboard and this incredible architecture together. So that's doing something very interesting to me. But more than anything, I'm reminded of collage. And if you hadn't told me what this was, and to be honest, the Duomo, it doesn't look real. It looks like some kind of poster or torn from a magazine. If you told me this was a collage, I would completely believe you. It's fabulous. Have you ever tried to tear up your photographs and create some kind of collage yourself? It looks like you maybe done this here. It's quite extraordinary.
I have not done that, but I have thought about it. Right now, my perimeters are photography. If I start trying to go beyond those perimeters, then all of a sudden I encounter a world of possibilities that I can't seem to navigate. I don't know where to go with it. And I've seen a lot of other people do work, painting or otherwise, that I think, oh man, I want to try that. That looks so cool to do that. But I think I've learned over the years just to kind of stay within myself. And staying within myself means working with photography. I mean, I've got thousands of images to work with. I mean, working with collage is maybe a possibility at some point because I love collage. I love seeing what other people do, but I am kind of working with collage. It's just a different way of putting them together. But yeah, these are just basically two photographic images. That's what it is.
Ah, it's incredible. And to be honest, you really don't need to experiment with different art forms. What you're doing with your photographs, with your images, you're creating paintings, you're creating collage, you're creating film stills. You don't need to do anything else. The cracks in this one, please tell us all about this.
The main image I took in Pacific Grove, California. I lived down there for about 3 years. And then the background image I took in a little town called Jacumba, California, right on the border of Mexico. And Jacumba was not quite a ghost town, but it was close to it. A lot of abandoned buildings with a lot of cracked paint and stuff. And again, I took both images. I had no idea that they would ever come together, but when I was playing with him, that's how it happened. One reason I included this image, the symbology is not very subtle, but in the foreground, you have this kid wading in the water. And then further out in deeper water, you have this adult swimming. So it's almost like you see this kid testing the waters of life and trying to get to the place where this adult is, where he's gliding through the water effortlessly. So again, it's not very subtle symbology, but I still like it.
Well, it's subtle in the sense that these figures are pretty tiny. You have to look close to see them, and then the meaning that you're putting on it maybe is quite strong, but I don't necessarily think it's too blatant. And I'm just overwhelmed by the cracks, the texture of this one. This is one that I really want to just reach out and touch. Well, let's take a look at the last one you've got for us. Ah, yes, one of my favorites, and maybe an appropriate image to end with.
Yeah.
Please tell us about this one.
This one's called Memories of the Open Road. I have a friend who lives in Colorado, and at least once a year we try to do a road trip together. And usually they're not more than 3 or 4 days, but we travel a lot of ground in 3 or 4 days. And I go to take pictures. He's not a photographer, but he loves taking pictures. So we look for abandoned places and run down places. And both his images, the images of a truck, we took in a little place called Tucumcari in New Mexico. It's this town that was on Route 66, and then when Route 66 changed their highway, all of a sudden everybody just zoomed past Tucumcari, and it almost became a ghost town. It's starting to revive a little bit. It's more like an artist colony, but there's a lot of old stuff to photograph there. And then the middle image is an image that I took when I was on the road with him. We were going through Texas. I just took this picture of a deserted highway. When I put them together, the title just came to me. This is an old truck with memories of being on the open road. And it's also like an homage to me and my friend. And in fact, it's his birthday next Wednesday. And I made a print of this to send him for his birthday as a memento of our trips together. So this is not as abstract as the other ones, but I just love it. And I love what it says to me and about my experiences and going out and looking for pictures.
Oh, it's really wonderful. And I love the deeper significance of it. But there are so many things I like about it. Um, I almost like the fact that you're revealing something of your explorations and your discovery. This is the kind of thing that you're drawn to, and you're almost stepping back and giving us a kind of behind the scenes glimpse of how you go about finding your images. But I also really like the fact that this car, which you would normally maybe zoom in and take a photo of, is the frame itself to another image, but which is not real. So I feel that this is abstract, but just in a different sense of the
Yeah.
word. Maybe it's the meaning that's abstract, or maybe this is meta abstract photography. I don't know, but it's very, very appealing, and I really love what you've done here.
This is a really good example of when you look at the sky, where the sky meets the paint on the truck and also on the sides, just trying to blend the images together so that there's not an obvious end of one image in the beginning of another one. That's what I'm trying to do when I talk about subtlety.
Wow. Well, Alan, thank you so much for sharing your work and talking about it. I've admired your images for a long time, and I've heard you talk about them before, but it was quite wonderful to hear you talk about your life and work in this extended setting. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity and the invitation to talk about the work. So thanks.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to what you create next. Okay, take
Me
care.
too.